The fastest way to expose a fragile system is to stop feeding it. That's the part nobody tells you. Not because it's complicated, but because it's uncomfortable. When you quietly change your behavior, no announcement, no rebellion, no dramatic exit, you don't just improve your life. You trigger a reaction, and not a small one. A chain reaction. Because systems, whether social, professional, or emotional, rely on predictability. They survive on repetition, roles, and people staying exactly where they're expected to stay. Here's the fact that makes this story interesting. Psychologists have long observed that groups react more aggressively to unexpected non-compliance than to open opposition. When someone argues, the system braces. When someone simply stops participating the usual way, the system glitches. There's no rule book for handling someone who doesn't fight, doesn't explain, and doesn't ask for permission to evolve. That's when things get creative. Adults suddenly act like toddlers who just realize the toy doesn't scream anymore. What makes it almost funny is that you didn't set out to disrupt anything. You didn't flip tables or burn bridges. You just adjusted your standards, reclaimed your time, or stopped over-functioning for other people's comfort. And somehow, that was enough to send the room into a quiet panic. Smiles got tighter, jokes got sharper, conversations got strangely strategic. You became the subject of concern without ever applying for the position. This is how unintentional chaos really starts. Not with noise, but with absence. Not with rebellion, but with restraint. You removed your emotional labor from a system that had grown addicted to it, and the withdrawal symptoms were immediate. It's awkward, a little absurd, and yes, kind of hilarious, watching people scramble to diagnose a problem that only exists because you stopped carrying it for them. This isn't about superiority, power, or ego. It's about what happens when one person quietly steps out of alignment with expectations, and the entire structure reveals how unstable it always was. And once you see that reaction for what it is, you can never unsee it. Number one, you broke an unspoken contract you never agreed to. Most people don't realize how many silent agreements they're trapped in. No signatures, no conversations, just expectations that slowly harden into rules. You'll always be available. You'll always over-explain. You'll always soften your tone so others don't feel exposed. You'll stay in your lane, play your part, and make things easier for everyone else. The problem is, you were never asked if you wanted that job. The moment you stopped fulfilling that invisible agreement, confusion hit first, then irritation, then the meltdown. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you violated something people assumed was permanent. They had already calculated their comfort around your predictability. Your reliability had been budgeted into their emotional economy. When you quietly withdrew, the math stopped working. This is where it gets uncomfortable. People don't panic when you change loudly. They panic when you change without explanation. Loud change gives them something to argue with. Quiet change gives them nothing to grab. You didn't announce boundaries. You didn't demand respect. You just stopped operating under terms you never consented to, and suddenly everyone else had to adjust for the first time. What really unsettles people is that your shift exposes how much they were benefiting from your compliance. They weren't evil about it. Most weren't even aware. But once the benefit disappears, the absence feels personal. They call it distance. They call it attitude. They call it you being different now. What they're really reacting to is the loss of convenience. Here's the part no one admits out loud. Unspoken contracts only work when one person keeps honoring them. The second you stop, the illusion collapses. And instead of asking whether the agreement was fair, people rush to restore it. That's where guilt trips show up. That's where fake concern appears. That's where sudden resistance comes from. You didn't betray anyone. You didn't change into someone else. You simply reclaimed authorship over your own behavior. The meltdown wasn't about your actions. It was about the shock of realizing you were never obligated in the first place. Number 2, your calm exposed how emotionally overleveraged everyone else was. There's a strange discomfort people feel when someone stays calm in moments where panic is expected. Not because calm is wrong, but because it breaks the illusion that stress is mandatory. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't rush to defend yourself, you didn't scramble to manage everyone's feelings. And that quiet steadiness did something dangerous. It revealed how much emotional debt everyone else was carrying just to get through the day. Most people live emotionally overextended. They react before they think. They attach their self-worth to outcomes they can't control. They stay tense because they believe tension equals effort. When you didn't match that energy, it felt like you were refusing to pull your weight, even though you were simply refusing unnecessary chaos. Your calm made their constant agitation look optional, and that's deeply unsettling. What really triggered the meltdown wasn't your silence or your distance, it was the contrast. Your regulated response highlighted how dysregulated the environment actually was. People don't like seeing that. It's easier to label calm as cold, detached, or arrogant than to admit they've been living in survival mode for years. So they project. They interpret your steadiness as judgment, even when none is present. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Calm people don't escalate situations, but they do expose them. They reveal who relies on noise to feel relevant, who needs conflict to feel alive, and who has been confusing emotional intensity with importance. When you didn't join the emotional rush, you accidentally stripped away the cover everyone else was hiding behind. That's why reactions became exaggerated. Calm acts like a pressure test. The more unstable the system, the more extreme the response. Small issues turn dramatic. Minor changes feel threatening, not because of what you did, but because your presence made it harder to avoid self-awareness. You weren't trying to prove anything. You weren't trying to dominate the room. You were simply grounded. And grounding energy doesn't compete, it contrasts. It stands still while everything else shakes. In that stillness, people are forced to confront how much of their identity is built on being perpetually stressed. That realization hits harder than any argument ever could. Number 3, you became proof that their stress was optional. Most people carry stress like it's a badge of honor, an invisible proof that they're working hard, caring enough, or somehow surviving. They panic over minor inconveniences, overreact to small mistakes, and treat tension as a measure of importance. And then you show up, calm, steady, unbothered, and suddenly their entire world feels off balance. You didn't tell anyone to calm down. You didn't lecture them on perspective. You just existed without feeding the frenzy, and that alone became a revelation. Your quiet composure is dangerous because it silently broadcasts a message people don't want to hear. Their chaos isn't required. The frantic emails, the gossip-fueled meetings, the endless overthinking, they're optional. People around you are forced to see that their hyperactivity isn't a necessity, it's a choice. And that truth lands like a shockwave because it exposes how much of their identity is tied to being stressed, worried, or overwhelmed. It's even more unsettling because you didn't seek attention for it. You didn't announce, "Look how relaxed I am." There was no showmanship, no ego-driven display, just steady presence. And humans are instinctively threatened by contrast. When you move through life without the burden of unnecessary tension, you hold up a mirror they can't look away from. Their reactions, their panic, and even their sense of urgency suddenly look performative. That's why the meltdown happens. The stress-addicted system suddenly encounters a living example that the rules they've been following are flexible, and the shock isn't just cognitive, it's emotional. People don't know how to process that someone can function, achieve, and exist without buying into the collective drama. It feels like a personal slight, even when it isn't. By simply being calm, you reveal a deeper truth. The weight they carry is self-imposed. Their frantic energy has been a choice all along, and once that is exposed, everything cracks. Norms feel brittle, hierarchies feel questionable, and suddenly what they thought was essential begins to look optional. That revelation is uncomfortable, it's destabilizing, and yes, it can be downright hilarious to witness. Number 4, you removed friction from a system that runs on drama. Some environments thrive on tension. It's invisible, but very real. The meetings that should be simple take twice as long. The casual conversations are loaded with subtext. The energy in the room is constantly on edge, not because of real problems, but because drama is the engine that keeps everything moving. People unconsciously feed it, escalate it, and rely on it to feel engaged. And then you show up and do something nobody expected. You move through it smoothly. You don't escalate. You don't participate in the unnecessary conflicts. You just act as if the friction isn't there. The effect is immediate and jarring. Suddenly, the carefully constructed chaos doesn't function anymore. The whispers, the posturing, the micro-tensions, they all lose their purpose when someone refuses to react the way the system depends on. You aren't creating noise, you're simply not amplifying it, and in that absence, the cracks appear. People start overreacting because the usual signals that justify their drama are missing. The room becomes oddly tense, not because of conflict, but because the predictable conflict isn't happening. Here's what makes it truly destabilizing. The system doesn't know how to handle cooperation and composure at the same time. It has been built, reinforced, and conditioned around resistance. When one person bypasses that, it exposes just how much energy everyone else has been wasting on performative struggles. They may call it passive-aggressive behavior, detachment, or arrogance, but really, they're reacting to the disappearance of their safety net of chaos. Your presence becomes a silent disruptor. Without meaning to, you reveal that drama isn't a necessity. It's a habit, and habits, once broken, cause discomfort, confusion, and sometimes outright panic. The meltdown isn't about you personally. It's about the system realizing it can no longer function the same way. By simply removing yourself from the friction, you turn the whole structure on its head. The more the system relied on drama, the bigger the reaction. What you did wasn't dramatic. It was invisible, effortless, and far more powerful. Number 5, your independence triggered their fear of replaceability. Independence is quietly unsettling for people who are used to control, comfort, or predictability. When you act without needing validation, when you make choices for yourself instead of seeking permission, it sends a subtle but powerful signal. You don't depend on anyone the way they depended on you. And for some, that revelation is terrifying. It forces them to confront a truth they'd been conveniently ignoring, that you, just like everyone else, could walk away at any moment. What's fascinating is how quickly this fear escalates. People don't panic when someone is powerless. They panic when someone is self-sufficient. Independence highlights vulnerability in ways no argument ever could. The more autonomous you are, the more exposed others feel. They start scanning your actions for hidden signs. They exaggerate minor mistakes, and suddenly the smallest decision you make becomes a crisis in their eyes. Your freedom is their reminder that nothing and no one is truly indispensable. Independence doesn't have to be loud. You don't need to announce it, flaunt it, or assert it. Simply living on your own terms is enough to ripple through the system. It forces people to rethink assumptions about loyalty, obligation, and control. Suddenly, the rules they thought were universal feel arbitrary. The hierarchy they relied on looks fragile, and the very idea that someone could function without their input becomes a threat. Here's the brutal truth. Most meltdowns happen not because someone did harm, but because someone refused to be contained. When you refuse to rely on them, to wait for approval, or to conform to unspoken expectations, the panic begins. The system doesn't know how to cope with someone who is untethered from its control. Your independence becomes a mirror. It shows others exactly how replaceable they thought you were, and by contrast, how much they themselves depend on roles, structures, and rituals to feel relevant. That realization is uncomfortable, destabilizing, and often hilariously disproportionate. You didn't break anything. You simply stopped being a cog in someone else's comfort zone, and in doing so, you revealed a truth they weren't ready to face. Number 6, you stopped negotiating your worth in public. There's a silent economy that runs in every social and professional circle, a place where people trade validation, attention, and approval as if they were currency. Most of us spend a lifetime negotiating for it without even realizing it. We explain ourselves, justify decisions, soften our opinions, and apologize preemptively, all in public. It's exhausting, and it gives others power over our presence, our energy, and sometimes even our self-esteem. Then you do something unusual. You stop. You stop performing. You stop defending yourself. You stop explaining your value to anyone who didn't already recognize it. That simple act is destabilizing. People who thrived on influencing your choices, questioning your motives, or managing your reputation suddenly realize the negotiation table is gone. You are no longer available for their scripts. The subtle leverage they held evaporates. What follows is often confusion, frustration, and yes, meltdown. Not because you demanded respect, but because you quietly reclaimed it. They were used to seeing your worth measured by how much effort you put into proving it. And suddenly that metric is gone. What's fascinating is how people react. Some try to pull you back into the old rhythm, asking for explanations or attempting persuasion. Others escalate, projecting insecurity, envy, or frustration onto you. All of it happens because your self-containment exposes their dependence on your overperformance. By simply refusing to barter for acknowledgement, you reveal the truth. Your value was never theirs to negotiate. Stopping the public negotiation of your worth isn't arrogance, it's clarity. It's a declaration that your energy and attention are yours alone. And in a system that relies on continual justification, that clarity is like a ripple through calm water. It exposes insecurities, breaks habits, and forces everyone else to reconsider how they relate to you. The meltdown isn't about you personally. It's about a structure that thrived on silent compromise, realizing it no longer has control. You didn't fight anyone. You didn't issue ultimatums. You simply stopped performing. And that quiet refusal is far more powerful and far more unsettling than any argument ever could be. Number 7, you highlighted how performative their confidence really was. Confidence is one of those things people often assume is obvious, but in reality, it's as fragile as glass. Many people project it like armor, but when examined closely, it's often just performance. Gestures, tone, and rehearsed expressions masking uncertainty. Then you show up and act in a way that's genuine, effortless, and unshakable. You don't need to announce your competence or inflate your presence, and that's when it becomes dangerous. Your authenticity doesn't compete with theirs, it contrasts. And contrast has a way of exposing the cracks no amount of bravado can hide. The meltdown begins subtly. A smile here, a comment there, a calm decision made without fanfare. It's enough to make them uneasy. Their confidence, which they had assumed was solid and unquestionable, starts to look like an act. The gestures that once seemed natural now appear calculated. They start overcompensating, raising their volume, exaggerating their certainty, trying to reclaim the sense of authority your mere presence has disrupted. You don't even have to try. You simply exist as evidence that their performance wasn't necessary to begin with. What's truly unsettling for them is that your confidence doesn't seek validation. It doesn't beg for recognition or approval. It just operates. And people who rely on performative confidence for influence or control suddenly feel exposed. The difference between showing off and simply being is revealed, and it's uncomfortable, even threatening, because it highlights their reliance on perception rather than substance. Your presence becomes a mirror. The more performative someone's confidence was, the harsher the reflection. And that reflection isn't kind. It forces them to confront their insecurities, the ways they've relied on appearances, and the truth that their assumed authority was never as solid as they believed. You didn't destabilize them with words or confrontation. You destabilized them by being real, steady, and competent without needing anyone to notice. That quiet, undeniable proof is often more devastating than any direct challenge. In exposing the performative, you reveal the truth they've been hiding from themselves, and that truth can trigger reactions far louder than any argument ever could. Number 8, you became a mirror they couldn't smash. Some people live in a world built on projection. They carry insecurities, fears, and unacknowledged weaknesses, and they interact with others as if those flaws can be hidden indefinitely. They need reflection, but only the kind they control, someone to reinforce their ego, someone to absorb their judgments, someone to confirm their self-image. Then you appear calm, composed, and unwilling to participate in the charade. In doing so, you become a mirror. And not the kind that can be shattering with a glance or covered up with excuses. You reflect back the truth they refuse to face, and the result is chaos. This mirror is terrifying because it can't be broken. No argument will distort it. No manipulation will twist it. It simply shows what is already there: envy, insecurity, laziness, or dishonesty. The more they try to distort it, the clearer the reflection becomes. Suddenly, they are forced to confront themselves without the usual distractions or defenses. Their discomfort grows, and the emotional system they relied on to feel safe begins to glitch. What makes this so destabilizing is that you never even intended to be threatening. You didn't go looking for confrontation. You didn't make judgments or accusations. You simply existed with honesty, clarity, and boundaries. But the very act of not participating in the projection triggers an internal alarm in others. Their carefully curated self-perception cracks, and panic, resentment, or overreaction fills the space. Being a mirror also exposes their dependence on external validation. When someone else's reflection highlights your internal inconsistencies, you're confronted with the truth you can't escape. And they see this truth projected outwardly in you, and they hate it, fear it, and sometimes try to destroy it. But it can't be destroyed because it isn't a creation of theirs. You didn't need to argue, prove, or confront. Your presence was enough. Simply by being steady, authentic, and non-compliant with their unspoken expectations, you forced them to meet themselves head-on. And that mirror they can't smash becomes the source of their meltdown, their confusion, and their quietly escalating panic. Number 9, you refused emotional participation trophies. Most people operate under the assumption that effort automatically demands recognition. They expect validation for showing up, for speaking loudly, for displaying drama, or even for simply existing within a system. These are the emotional participation trophies: attention, approval, praise, and validation that are handed out not for impact, insight, or contribution, but for compliance and noise. You, however, refuse to play along. You didn't reward overreactions with your energy. You didn't feed theatrics with your concern. You simply withheld the attention that inflated the illusion, and that refusal alone triggered chaos. What's fascinating is how people respond to this kind of independence. When someone stops confirming their assumptions, when they stop applauding performances they didn't ask for, the system destabilizes. Suddenly, reactions that once felt natural and justified now seem exaggerated, unnecessary, or even ridiculous. Your absence of validation becomes a lens, forcing people to confront the gap between their perception of themselves and how they actually appear. This refusal doesn't need to be loud or confrontational. You didn't announce, "I won't participate." You just stopped participating. And because so much of social interaction relies on subtle reinforcement, your withdrawal feels like a breach of some unwritten contract. People scramble to restore the balance they were accustomed to, often overcompensating with anger, confusion, or frantic attempts to regain control. The deeper truth is that emotional participation trophies create dependency. They encourage performative behavior, inflated egos, and constant neediness. By refusing to grant them, you strip away the illusion that presence alone is valuable. You make people accountable for their own impact, their own effort, and their own choices. That realization is uncomfortable, disorienting, and often triggers disproportionate reactions. You didn't need to fight or dominate. You simply stopped participating in a system built on needless validation, and in that refusal, you exposed how much of the chaos around you relied on compliance, attention-seeking, and ego. The meltdown wasn't about your actions. It was about the sudden absence of a reward they had counted on for far too long. Number 10, you showed that effort beats entitlement every time. There's a hidden hierarchy in almost every group, and it's not always obvious. Some people believe that recognition, respect, or privilege is something you're owed, a natural reward for existing or holding a title. They operate under entitlement, expecting influence, attention, or status without doing the work to justify it. Then there are those who quietly demonstrate that effort, not demand, is what actually moves the needle. You fall into that second category. You show up, contribute, follow through, and handle responsibilities with consistency, competence, and attention. You don't complain, you don't argue for credit, you simply do the work, and the results speak louder than any entitlement ever could. The effect on those who rely on entitlement is destabilizing. They've built their confidence and control around the assumption that positions, appearances, or loudness guarantee influence. Your presence exposes the illusion. When someone sees consistent effort achieving tangible results, while entitlement sputters, it forces a confrontation with reality, one that people rarely want to face. Suddenly, the system they counted on feels shaky. The hierarchy they relied on looks arbitrary, and the supposed authority they assumed is undermined, not by confrontation, but by the quiet power of competence. What makes this even more unsettling is that effort is invisible until it produces results. You don't need to prove your worth constantly. You don't need to demand acknowledgement or lecture anyone on your contributions. By simply performing well, efficiently, and without fuss, you shift the balance in a way that's undeniable yet uncomfortable for others. The meltdown that follows isn't about envy alone. It's about the cognitive dissonance of watching someone achieve influence and move forward through diligence rather than expectation. It forces people to examine the gap between what they claim they deserve and what they actually earn. You didn't cheat. You didn't demand. You didn't negotiate for recognition. You simply showed through consistent action that effort is the only currency that matters. And when entitlement encounters results it can't buy, panic and resentment are inevitable. Your quiet competence becomes the proof that success is earned, not granted. and that truth alone is often more destabilizing than any argument ever could be. Number 11, you made their hierarchy feel fake. Every group, every system, every organization runs on an invisible ladder. Titles, seniority, social positioning, they all create the illusion of order, authority, and stability. People lean on it, justify it, and navigate their lives assuming that climbing, maintaining, or defending this ladder is essential. Then you step into that system without treating the hierarchy as sacred. You act according to competence, clarity, and principle rather than rank or expectation. And suddenly the whole structure feels fragile. Your actions expose the hierarchy for what it really is, a set of conventions designed to protect egos more than to reflect real value or skill. The destabilizing effect is immediate. People who relied on position to dictate influence find themselves unmoored. Orders that used to command compliance are met with quiet observation rather than automatic acceptance. Protocols that felt mandatory suddenly seem optional when someone operates outside them effortlessly. Your disregard for the arbitrary structure doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't need fanfare. It simply shows that respect, authority, and influence aren't tied to the labels people wear, but to the substance of their actions. What really triggers the meltdown is the cognitive dissonance your presence creates. People have invested time, energy, and identity in climbing or protecting the ladder. When someone moves freely without acknowledging it, the system looks shaky. Their titles, positions, and supposed dominance no longer guarantee anything. It's a subtle, quiet revelation. The hierarchy they believed was solid is only as strong as the compliance it receives. Your actions become a mirror, reflecting the fragility they were avoiding. They may react with annoyance, defensiveness, or exaggerated displays of authority, but the truth remains undeniable. By simply operating on competence and principle rather than expectation, you expose that much of the ladder is performative, not functional. You didn't overthrow anyone. You didn't demand change. You didn't shout defiance. You moved with quiet autonomy, and in doing so, you revealed the system's cracks. The hierarchy felt fake because, in reality, it was always maintained by fear, assumption, and compliance. And your presence stripped away the need for all three. Number 12, you normalized self-respect without announcing it. Self-respect is one of those things people think they understand, but very few actually practice in a way that's visible yet unobtrusive. Most people either overcompensate with arrogance or dilute it with people-pleasing. They either shout their boundaries or quietly let them be crossed. You, however, did something rare. You embodied self-respect naturally, without fanfare, without explanation, without seeking anyone's approval. You simply lived by your standards, and in doing so, you set a quiet benchmark that others couldn't ignore. This is unsettling for people who have grown accustomed to managing others' perceptions. When you hold yourself in a way that is consistent, firm, and unyielding, without needing applause or justification, it forces a silent confrontation. Others notice that their compromises, their concessions, and their manipulations have been unnecessary or excessive. They feel exposed, not because you criticized them, but because your presence silently challenges the norms they've been relying on. The meltdown happens precisely because your self-respect doesn't negotiate. You don't apologize for being consistent. You don't justify your boundaries. You simply exist with dignity. People who are used to extracting energy, influence, or control from others suddenly find that their usual levers are useless. Your autonomy creates a vacuum that the system struggles to fill, and when old habits can't assert themselves, reactions often escalate, sometimes irrationally. What makes this particularly destabilizing is that self-respect is inherently silent, but highly communicative. You don't have to point it out. It speaks through actions, decisions, and boundaries. And for people who have built their comfort zones around the expectation that others will tolerate or absorb their behavior, seeing someone operate on a self-contained standard is threatening. You didn't set out to teach anyone a lesson or prove a point. You simply respected yourself in a way that was natural, inevitable, and uncompromising. And that quiet act of integrity, so effortless for you but impossible for others to ignore, disrupted expectations, exposed vulnerabilities, and created a ripple effect that no drama, argument, or confrontation could ever achieve. Your self-respect became the quiet catalyst for a meltdown they never saw coming. Number 13, you turned their private resentment into a public malfunction. People carry grudges, insecurities, and resentments like invisible backpacks. They grumble quietly, complain under their breath, and vent in safe corners, all while maintaining a facade of normalcy. These feelings are private, carefully contained, and rarely visible. Then you do something unassuming. Perhaps you stop over-accommodating, remain indifferent to provocation, or quietly assert a boundary. And suddenly, those private tensions spill into the open. You didn't force it. You didn't confront anyone. You simply existed in a way that no longer fed the underlying irritation, and the system couldn't contain itself. What's remarkable is how predictable the reaction is. The same people who carefully curated their internal complaints are suddenly acting out externally. Meetings get tense over trivial matters. Conversations feel loaded. Minor mistakes become evidence of a larger problem. Their carefully managed resentment transforms into visible chaos, all triggered by your refusal to participate in it. You didn't start a fight, but the absence of your compliance exposes the emotional instability they were suppressing. This happens because resentment thrives on attention. It grows when unchallenged, quietly accumulating until it reaches critical mass. Your presence, however, interrupts that growth. By not feeding into their narrative, by refusing to validate grievances with your energy or reaction, you become a catalyst that converts internal tension into visible disruption. It's like someone turned a pressure valve the wrong way. The system wasn't ready for release, and now everything rattles. The subtle genius of this effect is that you don't even need to try. You don't need to comment, argue, or escalate. Simply maintaining consistency, neutrality, and self-respect is enough to expose the underlying fragility of others. What was once contained and private becomes impossible to ignore. You turned a private phenomenon into a public spectacle without raising your voice or forcing confrontation. And in doing so, you revealed a truth people often resist. Their emotional turbulence, once hidden, is far more visible and far more destabilizing than they are willing to admit. Your quiet refusal to participate became the spark that exposed what was always simmering beneath the surface. Number 14, you proved that not everyone needs permission to evolve. Most people live as if growth, change, or progress must be sanctioned by others. They wait for approval, seek guidance at every step, or measure their advancement against someone else's expectations. The moment you act differently, when you evolve quietly, deliberately, and without asking anyone's permission, you shatter that illusion. You show that personal transformation doesn't require validation, consent, or acknowledgement. You don't need anyone's blessing to think differently, to act with clarity, or to prioritize your own trajectory. And that realization hits others harder than any confrontation could. What makes this dangerous to the system around you is that it exposes dependency. People who have built their comfort zones on controlling or guiding others suddenly realize that influence is optional. Their authority feels conditional. Their opinions about what's allowed or expected lose weight. Watching someone move forward autonomously forces them to confront the fact that their control was never as absolute as they believed. It's destabilizing because evolution is a quiet act. yet its effects ripple outward, subtly rewriting the rules everyone else thought were fixed. The reactions are predictable but intense. People scramble to rationalize your change, question your motives, or even attempt to pull you back into their framework. Some may resent you for moving ahead without acknowledgement. Others may panic internally, realizing that their assumptions about compliance, dependence, and predictability no longer hold. All of this unfolds while you remain calm, steady, and unapologetically self-directed. Your evolution doesn't attack anyone, but it exposes truths they've avoided. That change is possible without permission, that standards they relied on were arbitrary, and that independence is both attainable and undeniable. The brilliance of this is in its subtlety. You didn't need to announce your growth or stage a dramatic transformation. You simply acted in alignment with your priorities, values, and vision. And in doing so, you became proof that the only authority required for evolution is your own. Others can resist, criticize, or panic all they want, but your forward motion continues unimpeded. That silent, unstoppable evolution is both disruptive and liberating, and it's often far more unsettling than any argument, confrontation, or rule ever could be. The truth is, the world is full of invisible expectations, silent agreements, and unspoken hierarchies that shape how people behave and react. Most of the time, we don't notice them until someone moves differently, refuses to conform, or simply acts with clarity, calm, and self-respect. What we've explored is how one person, without intention or spectacle, can quietly disrupt entire systems, expose insecurities, and reveal truths that others desperately try to ignore. From breaking unspoken contracts and highlighting performative confidence, to refusing emotional participation trophies and proving that growth doesn't require permission, each action ripples far beyond the individual, showing that independence, authenticity, and effort are forces that can't be contained. What's remarkable is that none of this required confrontation. None of it needed arguments, loud declarations, or attempts to teach a lesson. The impact comes from living with integrity, consistency, and self-direction. It's in the subtle refusals, the calm presence, and the unwillingness to over-explain or over-perform. When someone embodies these principles, they inadvertently set off reactions, meltdowns, and recalibrations around them, because they reveal how much of the old system relied on compliance, noise, or fear. That's the kind of power that doesn't scream, but resonates deeply. This isn't about being superior or seeking chaos. It's about understanding that true influence and transformation often come from quiet mastery of oneself, from boundaries held without apology, and from the courage to move forward without needing validation. The ripple effect that follows is both revealing and, in its own way, a little hilarious. Watching fragile structures wobble under the weight of one person simply refusing to bend unnecessarily. If this resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more insights that peel back the layers of human behavior. Like, comment, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that independence, calm, and authenticity are far more disruptive and far more powerful than chaos ever could be. Stay blessed always.